all ramping around doing things up there. You hear my father, these armor shoes that he wore all the time. Come up the stairs like this and would always jump in our beds and turn out the lights before he got to the top of the stairs. But the nights that my mother went out, we had a second-story window that was over an L of the house. And we'd climb out the second-story window. And then there was a table that my father had made in the yard. It was very sturdy. And you could come off the L. You'd step on the window in the L, and then down on this table would be out the ground. And they would play in the apple trees. There were 2 apple trees and 2 grape arbors, and you could climb up any one and still get off the ground and go one apple tree to another apple tree to this grape arbor, that grape arbor, and run all around up like that.
Oh, that's pretty neat.
Yeah, it was neat. And then we'd see my mother's car with the lights coming in the driveway. We'd all jump, up at the bed and pull the covers over our heads. Like we'd been asleep all that time.
That's funny. I never heard that story.
That's great.
We were I was the youngest and I was 10 at that time because we moved to the new house. Now, this is Depression time, and my father's mother and father, I don't know why, but I never knew them, and I'm still under 10 years old. I never got a Christmas card or got a present or knew they existed. And all of a sudden, they showed up in Rhode Island, dead broke. And they had done the European tour. In those days, you had to be pretty wealthy. And they moved in with us, and we had a parlor that was set up from the dining room by French doors. So they moved into the parlor for quite a while, and there was never a happy feeling between the two of them. And there wasn't between my father and his family. And I guess they had money. And when they had money, they went to Europe for the Grand Tour, which people of money did in those days.
Right.
And my father came from people of money. So they did that. And while they were gone, their only daughter died of pneumonia.
Mm.
And my father was the one child. And their oldest son died of meningitis when he was about 21 or 22. And the pictures of him, he looked mentally not right. And then Uncle Dewey was born, and he was crippled all his life. Now, I've heard different theories about him. And one I heard that he had rickets, and his mother was told to give him certain things to eat and drink, and his mother wouldn't do it. This is what I heard from different sources. Because he cried and fussed. So he got his way, but his legs didn't grow right. So he was on crutches all his life, all the time I knew him. So it was not really a happy family. You didn't get a happy feeling about them. So it was, and my father didn't like his own parents. I think he felt, I think my father was going to MIT, and his father ran out of money from some investment that wasn't considered very smart, and he had to leave MIT, and he didn't graduate. And then he was in the Army, he was in the National Guard, and he was sent to this border dispute between Mexico and the United States. And then he came back from that, and he was still in the National Guard, but I remember that was part of ill feeling. They were not a loving family. Why they show up when I'm 10 years old and broke and move in. Well, then at that time, my father's uncle, Edward Everson, who, I guess he owned the Narragansett Improvement Company with another person.
Hmm.
And at that time, I've forgotten just when no, he didn't buy out the other factor. Was when my father, when this uncle died, they had no children. That was in that big house on Narragansett Boulevard that I've showed you going by.
Right?
And they owned that house, and they had a maid, and they lived up and the maid, they had a gardener who took care of the lower yard, and they had a nice lifestyle. But anyway, he died, and he left money to my father, and I don't know how much it was, but he was the brother of my father. My father's uncle. The two men were brothers. And yeah, it was my father's father who he wasn't fond of. And I don't know if the mother got split between them. How much my father got, how much his brother got, I don't know, but I know there was a feeling between them. It wasn't that much or something, but my father's brother was putting the fee on him. He wanted the money to build a house for he and his wife, and my mother was putting the fee on him. She wanted him to build a house for her children, for she and her children. And I guess my mother won out. And we had a brand new house built on a vacant lot down at the end of the street. Now at the end of the street was a cove, a little smaller than Barrington Cove, smaller than that, but it was a cove and had a yacht club in it and a few sailboats. Not as big as down further was the Washington Park Yacht Club, and down further was the Edward Yacht Club, which was bigger and more prestigious. But anyway, my mother went out, and she won the argument with my father, and he used the money to build the house for his family instead of giving all of it to him. And his brother got a house out in Edgewood. Wasn't new or anything, but was a perfectly nice house for the two of them to live in. So I remember that part. What did you ask me? Well, between the relationship of the family and my mother's family were very different. They were blue collar, and they were much nicer to each other. But my father's family, I didn't have any great feeling for him. As a matter of fact, my grandpa had a mustache that was white and stiff. And when he came to visit, I was supposed to kiss him goodnight going out the door. And I hated that mustache.
You said your mom and her family didn't get along though too, huh?
Oh, that was her sisters in older age when the two aunts, my mother's sisters, had no children. One was married once to one husband, and they never had children. And the other one was married to two different husbands, and she didn't have any children with either one. So they doted on my mother's children. And my sister was the oldest, and she was actually born at home in their house when my father was overseas. So they took a liking to this little girl. And then she must have been about 3. And the time I drank to lie, and my throat was all scarred, and I wasn't expected to live, and I had to be very carefully looked after. Doctors gave a lot of free time that my parents couldn't have afforded. This doctor that was in that field came down from Boston all the time and looked after me. And I wasn't expected to survive, so they were studying it. Well, at that time, with a child as sick and a little boy, the 2 other sisters kept the older girl with them. And by the time that I was out of danger, they wanted to adopt her, and my mother wouldn't give her up. So I think that started some little feelings there. They think, well, she's got 2 children, and I don't have any. And the one that was married at the time wanted, and my mother wouldn't give her up. So they didn't like that. But my mother had a very hard time with me. She had to keep me right beside her bed all the time, or I would have choked to death in the middle of the night.
Wow.
I was considered, it was a miracle that I lived.
Right.
And all these people gave their time and watched over me. And these doctors drove themselves down from Boston to see my progress. And my mother used to take the food. Now, there wasn't any baby food on the market at this time. So my mother would strain the same things that she and my father were eating and put it through a strainer and feed it to me, because that was all I would go down my throat.
Right.
So then the nurses would say, well, when I was in the hospital, I didn't get served that. I don't know what they gave me. But when they let me go home to my mother, and she fed me that way, I was coming along nicely and gaining a little in that. And she did that and saved my life. And she and my father, well, I used to have food stuck in my throat all the time. And I can remember after I was fed the baby food, and even as I was getting low, and any time my food was always mashed up of what the rest of them had for supper. And I would go to throat, and my mother would take me by the heels. I'm small, pick me up and shake me over the sink of the toilet until the food came out.
Wow. I didn't know that either.
Well, that's why you see my son and any members of my family, if I start to cough or something, they get nervous.
Right. I still do.
Well, I guess 97 was the last time I had to go to the hospital. And this trip I don't have it with me, but I have Cafegot suppositories,
Right.
which I've used. I wouldn't go anywhere without them. Cruise ship even, I had them, but I haven't had to use them. I think one of the last times that I had a problem, I remember when I was in Maui, in the Hawaiian Islands, I was on this tour and I had it happen to me. And I told my tour director, I said, I can't go to a doctor, I have to go to an ophthalmologist. I said, the problem is down here, and an ordinary doctor can't help me. So he took me to the hospital in Maui, and I'm in there, and they have you take off your clothes and put this on, and I'm sitting there cold in this thing, and I look up, and I'm thinking, oh my God, who would be way out here? Must be some. And I looked at his name, and he said he was a member of the American Academy. I said, oh, thank God. So he gave me, I forgot the name of the liquid.
Barium. Barium.
Yeah, you swallow this barium so he could see how far down it was in my throat. And the barium took it all the way down.
Wow.
Right.
So, and he said that had happened before. So when I was at home and I thought of the awful awfuls, you've had an awful.
Yes.
Newport Creamy. And Howard used to have some Newport Creamy ice cream, and he actually had bought some of those awful awfuls and had them in the freezer. So I called him up one night. I said, do you have some of that? And he said no, but he came over and he whipped up the ice. The
Something
ice
like
cream,
it, right?
Ice cream. Was real thick. And he brought it over and I took it and it went down with it. Did the same thing.
Wow.
That's great.
But I would go to sleep with Cafegot suppository, and that would relax my throat as I was sleeping. Then I'd get up in the morning and it'd be all right. So I escaped quite a few times that way. I was down to visit my sister in North Carolina, and I had brought my suppositories with me, and she put them in the refrigerator. And her husband, who had these violent headaches at that time, and he had suppositories. So he went to the refrigerator and took mine out.
Oh no.
Yeah. Well, it worked on him. It was the same thing. It was just a different brand name. But they looked alike.
That's funny.
Yeah. And I didn't know at that time that doctors used them for violent headaches. But I have traveled with them all the time, even on that cruise ship. I had them with me.